Hello and welcome to Tattvadeep, Conversations and Explorations. This video is a compilation of responses that our guests in the physics series shared with us as they interpreted the symbolic meaning of the monolith in Stanley Kubrick's classic film 2001, A Space Odyssey. The monolith and the film itself have been inspiring people to think out of the box since its release in 1968. What it means, who put it there and why, and what it meant to those who saw it are some of the key areas that people have attempted to explore through their interpretations over the years. In fact, we found an article and an interview where Mr. Stanley Kubrick himself talks about the overall flavor of the film as being, quote, a subjective experience which hits the viewer at an inner level of consciousness, just as music does or painting. He further adds that it reaches the viewer's subconscious in a way that is essentially poetic and philosophic, unquote. The links are shared in the description box. When we first asked this question, we did not intend to turn it into a common question for all our guests in the physics series. Yet, something about the nature of the film, space travel, technology, and some clearly advanced philosophical underpinnings pushed us in that direction. Although it's the interpretation of the monolith that was the focus of our question, the act of interpreting perhaps has a wider implication. Interpretation might be a tool that can help us dig deeper into our own minds and discover new inner experiences that may even enrich our interactions with the world. For instance, one's attempt to understand the monolith in Space Odyssey, the ring in Lord of the Rings, the ruby slippers in Wizard of Oz, the shimmer in Annihilation, the wonderland in Alice in Wonderland, and many other symbolic references in films and other mediums can help individuals hone their interpretive skills. And that's a more useful tool to develop than may seem on the surface, especially since our conversations with mathematicians, linguists, and physicists has showed us that all manners of equations, letters, words, formulas, etc. are but representations of something more fundamental. An equation might very likely be a summation of a how pointing towards a why. And words too seem to be more conceptual than we generally perceive them to be today. One of Mr. Manly P. Hall's lectures on the philosophy and symbolism of numbers can influence the way we look at numbers as experts and non-experts. The link to the said lecture has also been shared. In any case, interpretation can be a fun exercise, and when done diligently, it can expand the limits of our thought and even improve our capacity to understand and express ourselves. With that, let's get straight to what our physicists and philosophers of physics had to say about the symbolic meaning of the monolith. We'd like to thank our guests once again for sharing their insights with us. Enjoy.
Oh, the monolith?
Yeah.
Oh, I think I understand that movie. I mean, that's one movie I have seen literally dozens of times. It was one of my favorite movies growing up. So I think the story. I'll just tell you. I think what's going on in that movie is actually pretty clear. So in the beginning, when you have the apes and they're have this very hard Scrabble existence trying to survive and fighting with other bands of apes. And then what happens? Well, this monolith shows up, and the effect of it on one band of apes clearly is to move them up intellectually so that they become tool makers, right? I mean, that's what happens is this thing happens to them. And now all of a sudden the ape understands I can use this bone as a tool, right? I can use it as a weapon, but they go through all that. They have the fight. He throws the bone up in the air and it comes down as a spaceship. And all of that, in that entire sequence, you're saying, okay, there's this phase where animals, a special animal begins that's a tool maker. And it makes more and more and more and more sophisticated tools until you get up to space travel.
Yeah.
Right? That's all just working out tool making.
Yeah.
But then what you see is that life in space is so dead and airless and blank and unhuman, right? That human beings, as human beings, the only real human interaction in that entire movie is a little bit when the guy is talking to his daughter on the video phone, you know, and you see a little bit of actual human life. The rest of it is just sterile and dead, and the language is dead, and people are, right? And so that's as far as technology can take us, right? And then this other monolith. So what's the monolith? The monolith was put there by this advanced civilization that gives this impulse that takes the apes and makes them into tool makers, and then buries this other monolith on the moon, so that when that technology has gone as far as space travel, then it sends out this alert. Okay, these guys have gotten this far. That's as far as they can go, right? And then they go off, you know, I mean, there's an interesting question in my mind, actually, in the travel to Jupiter, that there's actually a fight between Hal and the humans. The question is, okay, is the artificial computer going to beat, you know, it's a kind of evolutionary struggle. Whoever wins that struggle is going to then be pushed up to the next level, right? But it turns out that Dave beats Hal, and he gets there, and then, you know, and then the final scene is, all right, now we're going to go to the next level of evolution,
right?
Where you no longer need technology, right? That's the star baby at the end,
right?
That's beyond technology, right? So that's, I mean, that's what I think is going on, and the monoliths are put there by this advanced civilization. That
I mean, if you
process,
if you break it down, these are markers. So every time, so you come here, and so somebody, if the advanced civilization, like you said, they know how far we have come. So then, does it become like, what about free will? What about time? Like, all it seems to me a matter of time. Like, I've seen the bone; it was always there, bones lying around. Finally, I have this impulse. Like, I think that sounds like the right word to me. The impulse suddenly comes from, because they say we don't know where our thoughts come from anyway. So let's, impulse. We'll settle for impulse, right? And the impulse is to use this now. And there are two ways to use it. You can use that as a tool to something, or as a tool, as a weapon for something else, like to create appearances, to say that I can hurt you. You know, that's something that we do. And then it's a matter of time from there to get to the other marker, which is on the moon, the monolith, which is on the moon. It's all a matter of time, how long it takes us, because that's where we are headed. Is that what the sense that you get from the film, that it's so determined that we're getting somewhere? It's just a matter of time. You know, what will keep us from getting there? And then again, it's a matter of time, which will keep us from, please.
Right, there's a certain potentiality in tool making. Now, it's true. It's true in the beginning they use it as a weapon to attack the other apes, but they also use it as a weapon to kill the pigs or whatever they are to eat. I don't think the weapon. You know, when you get to the future part, there's no real sense that there's
weaponizing,
militarization going on, right? This is just kind of pure technology. There's kind of an internal logic to pursuing technology for technology's sake. And it has its limit, you know, it's going to end up somewhere, but that may not be where you really want to end up. And I think that's what, you know, I think that's what the movie is all about, is to understand how the whole technology that made humans eventually denatures humanity itself, right? In some sense, the tools overcome the makers, right? And take the humanity out of life. And then you need to do something else, right? And of course, it's time, right? It's just the internal logic of developing technology over time. Things are going to get better and better and better technologically, but that doesn't mean that's going to be good for people.
And perhaps there is a sense of consciousness that we can't understand or measure underneath at all, which makes us use one thing as this or that. So maybe how we make our choices, maybe we can get a sense of what consciousness is from there, because the chimps used it as both as defense and as a weapon, and also to feed themselves, and they will be the ones who will end up becoming the future of the race, will end up going to space, right?
Right. But you also see, I mean, look, if you think about it this way, this idea that the technology has taken over and, as it were, overcome. So originally for the apes, it's clear that this tool making is good for them. It helps. I mean, they're in this terrible environment. You don't see a blade of grass. I mean, it's all just, you struggle for existence.
Yeah.
And then, one of the scenes that always sticks with you is the instructions for using the gravity-free toilet, which is like 10 steps that you have to do, where you say, okay, now you've just gone beyond normal human biology, right?
Yes. And you've accomplished so much, but now to get back to the basics, here are the new 10 steps.
What is the monolith? So I think the idea in the movie is that this is, it's a creation of aliens that are sort of transcend our normal ideas of time and space. So, they're operating in some, 4-dimensional reality or more than 4-dimensional kind of reality. And that's sort of the gateway for them to interact with our world and for our world to interact with them.
Thank you very much for this question. In fact, the film of Kubrick, 2001, Space Odyssey, was and remains until today one of my preferred science fiction films. By the way, I miss these sort of science fiction films because nowadays they are all about wars, monsters, people killing each other and so on, and it's stuff that appeals only at the lowest instincts of the human nature and not at its noblest. And these are sort of films nowadays that we have that are no longer able to imagine a better future, or at least show some interest in the mysteries of nature and the cosmos. Something that Kubrick was certainly able to do with his film. Well, so what is my interpretation of the symbolic meaning of the monolith? In fact, as far as I can remember, Arthur C. Clarke, the author of the screenplay, left this interpretation open. I hear, in fact, everyone giving a different interpretation because it's not the first time that I'm wondering about that, and also other people, of course. Anyway, I like to interpret it as a symbol for a higher state of consciousness. Something that, if we get into contact with, projects us towards a new state of awareness, a new state of consciousness, a new step forward in evolution, and consequently, a new species. In fact, if you recall the scene with the primate touching the monolith, then it suddenly acquired a higher cognitive faculty, namely that it was suddenly able to use tools. Similarly, for humans, when they discovered the monolith on the moon and later on Jupiter, there's something similar was happening. I like to interpret the last part of the film with the weird scene of the astronaut Dave traveling through that strange wormhole or whatever it was and landing on Jupiter's moon. I guess it was Europa. I interpret it as a rising of his own consciousness. From a human mental consciousness, he achieved a new and higher state of consciousness that goes beyond the human. So the monolith represents that future state of consciousness of humanity, and in that case, we probably will evolve towards another species that will no longer be called human, but something else. By the way, this is also in line with Sri Aurobindo's notion of what he called the gnostic being, a new transrational being, and what he envisaged as a supramental species, and that will transcend the present human rational being. But apart from these mystic visions, it is a perfectly rational and scientific point of view. In fact, I would say it would be a pretty much anthropocentric point of view to believe that we are the last rung of the evolutionary ladder. Also, according to Darwinian evolution, we are transitional beings. During the evolutionary process, we saw how raw matter became life, first in cells and then in multicellular beings, multicellular organisms, and that acquired progressively self-consciousness and progressively more sophisticated forms of cognition. And there is no scientific and no rational reason to believe that this process of self-discovery has stopped with us. So it would be quite arrogant to believe that we are the ultimate goal of evolution. It is perfectly in line with what science tells us about evolution. New forms of cognition will evolve from the human species as well. It is reasonable to conjecture that if humans will not destroy themselves in some nuclear holocaust or with weapons of mass destruction, we will be replaced by another being. It is obvious and inevitable that this is going to happen. And this being will be precisely that being that will have touched this monolith. And with him or her, both, a lot of other will follow. So I believe that we are actually in the phase where we have already touched the monolith. And this period of turmoil that humanity is actually going through is an evolutionary transition from the human to the transhuman. To make the analogy again, our period of transition in the film would be the last scene of Dave's hyperspace travel, so to speak. By the way, I would love to see a mission on the moon of Jupiter Europa, where we know that under its ice crust there is a gigantic ocean of liquid and also salty water, an ocean much bigger than the terrestrial ocean. There will be, for the end of this decade, I guess, if I'm not wrong, I think it's about at the end of this 2029. I think I'm not sure, but there will be a mission of a space probe that will study Europa, and we will map it and we will know more about that. But the real thing would be that of drilling a hole through its ice crust and seeing if there would be eventually some form of life. But this is still very futuristic and complicated mission that will take still a lot of time to get there. But certainly this is one of the more interesting scientific quests that we have so far, I would say. So I don't know if Kubrick or Clarke would agree with this interpretation, but my strong impression is that they more or less subliminally, at the subliminal level, perhaps without even being aware of this, already had this intuition and feeling and represented it in a symbolic way, that of the monolith representing a higher state of consciousness, and every being touching it will be awakened to this new awareness. Okay, so this is my take. Of course, the interpretation of the film as such might be completely wrong, but I'm pretty sure that this is the future of humanity, and it is by taking this point of view that a lot of things that previously looked mysterious or difficult to explain and to understand suddenly appear as something natural and almost self-evident.
I think it was again a bit like we were discussing earlier with Contact and so on. I think a very different kind of intelligence trying to make contact with human beings, but at the same time not directly intruding, and but observing, perhaps gently shaping in some ways at critical moments in history, and trying to sort of lead, just like some parent tries to lead a child, but this is sort of much more long distance parenting.
Much older, much wiser.
Yeah, but not in an explicit way. I mean, trying to intervene at points to take you to another level of consciousness.
An entity to advance evolution by giving it some kind of enlightenment. It's sort of something that is delivering a next phase of evolution to mankind by making it more aware of things like the illusions, for example. It's like a tool of awakening, a great awakening box. So each time that monolith appears, there is a leap a massive leap in the evolution of humanity or consciousness.
First time you see the monolith is, like I say, where this ape man is, finds a tool for war. And the monolith, I think, gives him a little zap. Somehow you get the idea that because the monolith is there is maybe part of the reason why he got the connection to use this bone as a weapon. But that's not really so much the point, is that the movie was really about the evolution of humanity, the evolution of mankind, and where we're going and who we are and where we're going. So the picture of the hominid becoming a tool user and the tools of war was think of that as a painting. And what does that tell you? How do you feel about that painting? Well, you see that war and violence was the motivation, but these were very beginning people. You see that there are other potentialities, and that's what the monolith was. It was a symbol for all the other possibilities for humankind, all the things that we humans could become, all the possibilities. So here was this monolith that just didn't belong in this scene with a lot of cavemen, and obviously we were hundreds of thousand years in the past. And most people, because they're thinking linearly, wanted to interpret it as something that aliens put there. This was the alien presence. The aliens had been there and they built this monolith because there it is. It's not a natural thing. Must be built by somebody, so it had to be the aliens. But that really wasn't the point. It had nothing really to do with aliens, as it had to do, I think, with the potential of humanity. And you might think those are really the same things. The fact that humans had the potential to grow up and eventually to explore space and go to other places. So that's kind of a potential. So people who saw it as an alien thing, I think got about 80% of it, because that's what it did. It stood for a potentiality that humans had. But here on this planet, here's this human, half ape, half human, finding a big bone that he can use to get what he wants, to give him more power, so that he can control things more. So that's the first monolith. And then when he bangs this bone and a bone flies up in the air, that bone turns into a rocket ship. Now suddenly the bone, we've gone from the past to the rocket ship. So now the next picture, now we're looking at the second picture in the art gallery. And the next picture now is a picture of this rocket ship flying up, and you see, oh man, the tool user has learned a lot. He's been around, now for a couple 100,000 years, and he's gone from beating people over the head with a bone to being able to get into a rocket ship and blast off, go someplace. So of course, this rocket ship wasn't going out to explore space. It was probably just taking a monkey around up into the air and back again. It didn't necessarily mean that we were that advanced to explore space, but at least we had rockets. And man had learned how to use tools and had used them to the point of being able to launch himself into space. So that's the next thing. All right, we're growing and we're in space. So now that then gets us to the moon, because we are able to go into space. So good. The human has evolved from tool user to moon rockets. He's on the moon, and he discovers there's this thing underground that is not natural. So they dig it up, and it's a monolith. But now it's a smaller monolith than before. It's a much smaller version of it. And that's because we have already developed much of our potential. We've gone from beating people with a bone to being able to fly off to the moon in a rocket ship. So we still have a lot of potential yet, but it's smaller in the sense that we've already actualized a lot of our potential. So there's a smaller monolith, and this monolith points them to go to Jupiter. It's like, again, you can think of the alien things that they need to, the aliens had this monolith as part of some kind of communication, and it was getting signals from Jupiter. So they wanted to go explore that. But again, it doesn't have to be aliens. It just is, we have to move further forward. Why Jupiter? Well, Jupiter, of course, was the head of the Roman pantheon. So he was the king god or the head god for the Romans. That's why Jupiter. The film is just full of symbology. Why was it A Space Odyssey 2001? Why 2001? Well, because 2001 was the first, January the 1st, 2001 was the first day of a new century. 2001 was when that's when the century turned. January 1st, 2001 was the 21st day of the 21st century. So that's why it was 2001, a new century. So here we're going to see the evolution of mankind, and we have a new century. So anyhow, so there's things like that all through the film that are just symbolic. So we go to Jupiter, and we find yet another obelisk there. Now this one doesn't take us very far, and it's even smaller yet. And so we get another picture in that we continue growing, and not only do we grow, but we jump again in the future. So now, instead of just being able to go to the moon, now we have advanced to the point that we have these computers that are sentient, or at least close to sentient, or could become sentient. And of course, in 2001, the computer was called HAL. This is where the word started. Once we got to that part, then there was actually dialogue involved. Before then, it was just music and pictures. So they're going to Jupiter in a much more advanced technological space than they were when they just went to the moon. So we've evolved more, and we have a computer that is conscious or near conscious. And we go to the moon, and of course, there's a couple of things that happen there. One, HAL, if not sentient before, becomes sentient and decides that it's going to kill the humans. The humans aren't very, humans aren't doing things right, and it's going to fix all that. So, HAL then starts turning off life support, to the humans. And there is maybe one human left. I don't remember. Again, the movie is a long, long time ago. There's not too much left. The guy finally turns the switch off and turns HAL off, before HAL kills everybody. He turns HAL off. And the next thing we know, so that's picture one, was us as the monkeys. Picture two, we have the rocket ship and we find the obelisk. Picture three is we're now in a much advanced technology. We're very advanced, and we have sentient computers and rocket ships that can just fly off to Jupiter and go to Jupiter. Now, Jupiter is not a rock. Jupiter is a gas planet, I think. So landing on Jupiter is kind of an odd thing. There's really nothing there to land on, I don't believe. But anyway, it doesn't matter. It's Jupiter is the head of the pantheon. So we go to Jupiter, and there we get another picture, which is man. We have a series of pictures where a man sees himself. He's in a capsule of himself, but he sees himself out in the room. So he's in the space capsule, but he sees himself outside the space capsule. So he goes outside the space capsule. Now he goes out there. Then he sees himself in another situation. He sees himself, across the room doing something. I don't know exactly what it was. So then he goes there and he does that. And the next thing, so that was, he's gone through a situation where he is able to go to wherever he thinks. He thinks, he dreams, he gets an image, he can go there. He can do that. Almost whatever he can dream, he can accomplish, you see. Now, the last thing he sees, so first he's younger, then he goes someplace and he's older. Now, the next picture is this very elaborate bedroom. And the elaborate bedroom, I don't know, it kind of reminds me of like the French court in the 17th or 18th century, all this elaborate furniture and decoration. And now he's old. He's an old person. So man has grown old. Now remember, this is not a man. We're talking about humanity. Humanity growing up and becoming more. So humanity, the caveman, humanity, the rocket man to the moon, humanity, the high tech that can zoom off in rocket ships with sentient computers, and then man who can build his dream. Whatever he dreams and sees, he can do it. And now at the end, we have man growing old. He's growing old, and he's lying in his bed, and he's dying. The old man is about to pass away. And the next thing we have, so that's a new picture. These are all separate pictures in an art gallery. And then the last picture is suddenly there's this infant. And there's an infant, a baby sitting there. And the baby turns around and stares directly into the camera, like the baby is looking at you in the audience. The baby's making eye contact with the audience. And again, for the last 2 or 3 minutes of the film, there's just this baby sitting there staring at the audience. Well, that's us. We've gone from caveman to spaceman to super high tech man to getting pretty much evolving into whatever we can imagine. And now we have to go beyond. We have to go beyond the physical. And that was the death. The old guy, he dies. And now the baby represents the humanity beyond the physical. You see, because the man that was dying is kind of the last one. Humanity is the physical being. Now it's humanity as the beyond physical. And then that's the baby. That's what we have to learn now, how to deal and how to be in that space that's non-physical, that's beyond the physical. So the baby sits there and kind of looks at you like, well, so now, what are you going to do? What are you going to become? What's next? Where is our next step after we've evolved through all these other spaces? Where is our next step? And the baby just represents not being a baby, it represents newness. Suddenly a whole new world, a whole new reality of things to understand and do. It's like, so we start off, we're like babies again. We've outgrown the physical form.
The monolith in 2001, A Space Odyssey, has always been a source of fascination, as much of the movie. Explicitly, I suppose it's to represent the recognition by aliens that their direction to incipient Homo sapiens would lead them on a path ultimately to space. And it was to mark that key development and provide direction later on for humans to proceed to where they wanted them to proceed. Symbolically, I think one could argue it has a similar but perhaps more realistic significance. It marks whatever genetic development in the human genome was crucial in the change from early hominids to Homo sapiens, to the path that would lead to my having this conversation right now with you, and to development of technology and modern human civilization. So I think of it as a marker of whatever attributes, and there may be many, played a central role in the deviation of the hominid species from the earlier common ancestor with other primates.